For 1,400 years, Islam has influenced the lives of millions of people. It is a religion based around the energies and characteristics of the planet Venus. When assigning Moon Day or Mono Day as the first day of the week, Friday or Venus Day becomes the fifth day. Friday is also Islam's holy day. Venus produces an interesting geometric pattern as it orbits both the Sun and the Earth. During its orbit, it will produce 5 conjunctions with the Sun. This is one of the reasons why the number 5 has been associated with Venus for thousands of years. When we look at the 2 signs of the zodiac ruled by Venus, Taurus and Libra, we discover that they make up the 2nd and 7th houses, 2 and 7, or 7 and 2. This is interesting because each angle of a pentagram is 72 degrees. The same number of virgins waiting for those good Muslims who finally make their way into paradise. With the glyph for Venus being a circle over a cross, it reflects the conscious mind's dilemma of balancing what part of the physical realm it chooses to focus on. This is essentially a metaphysical reflection of Libra and Taurus. Muslims pray 5 times a day and follow the 5 pillars of Islam. Their first pre-dawn prayer meeting, known as the Fajr, takes place when Venus appears on the horizon at Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Positive characteristics of Venus energy are all the pleasurable aspects of love and liking, whereas the inversion of this positive energy gives rise to the negative and undesirable side of Venus. This could be the true basis behind the personified character known as Lucifer. The giant black cube at Mecca, known as the Kaaba, was thought to have started life as a pre-Islamic observatory, a place where stars and solstices could easily be viewed and calculated. In Islamic tradition, the Kaaba was believed to have been built by Abraham at a time when pagan religious practices were conducted at its altar. A metaphysical explanation for the black cube as a temple can be found when considering that the black cube is not a natural phenomena. It is not something which is commonly found throughout nature. Consequently, it is a shape which reflects those artificial and machine-like qualities associated with the archons. Therefore, it is possible that the Kaaba's initial pre-Islamic role was as an altar to the demiurge and his archonic creations. Muhammad ibn was born in Mecca in 570 AD. His father, Abdullah ibn, was a member of the Banu Hashim clan, but tragically died a few months before Muhammad was born. When Muhammad was 6, his mother, Amina, on a trip to Medina also died, leaving him in the care of his grandfather, who would also die only 2 years later. He eventually found himself under the care of his uncle Abu Talib, who would become his protector as well as a great influence on him throughout his life. When Muhammad became a young adult, he began working as a simple shepherd, but later he accompanied his uncle on merchant caravan excursions to Syria and other cities around the Middle East. His time as a merchant was successful due to his good and trustworthy reputation, which he had developed along the way. When Muhammad was 25, he was invited to help a distinguished Quraysh merchant lady by the name of Khadijah, a widow 15 years his senior. They eventually fell in love and were married. Living in and around Mecca, Muhammad would occasionally go up to the rocky hills on the outskirts of the town to relax and meditate. One night he had a profound vision, a revelation in which the one true God revealed himself to Muhammad. Over the next few years, Muhammad withdrew from his life as a merchant and spent more time contemplating in the caves outside Mecca. Muslims believe that Muhammad was the final messenger of God, who, from 610 AD, received direct verbal revelations from the Almighty. All these revelations were eventually compiled in the Muslims' holy book, the Quran, together with the Hadith, which was a comprehensive record of Muhammad's words and actions, a compilation of texts which is second only to the Quran. If we look at the time Muhammad was born, 570 AD, as a segment of time within the Piscean epoch, we find not only was that year in Leo the lion, ruled by the sun, on the outer wheel, but also that Muhammad dies and becomes King of Kings to the Muslims in Leo on the inner wheel. This is a double Leo in the expansive age or epoch of Jupiter, highlighting such a significant time within the zodiacal time frame. As Muhammad's revelations increased, together with the number of followers, the Quraysh tribe, who were ruling Mecca, saw Muhammad's teachings as a threat to their traditional way of life and their well-established trading arrangements. At that time, the Kaaba was a polytheistic pagan religious focal point for various tribes to congregate and pay homage to their gods. The Quraysh saw Muhammad's monotheistic one-god approach as a destabilizing ideology which could undermine their business interests. As a consequence, the leaders of the Quraysh began to apply pressure on Muhammad in an attempt to bring him back in line. They placed a complete ban on the city undertaking any form of trade with Muhammad, including preventing him and his followers from buying food. When this failed, they escalated into violence, killing a number of those followers who were vulnerable. By 622, the situation in Mecca had become too dangerous for Muhammad and his followers. Consequently, they abandoned their home and city of birth to begin a new life in the northern town of Yathrib. Yathrib at that time was an oasis town of belligerent pagan and Jewish tribes. With a reputation for fairness and trustworthiness, Muhammad was asked by the various tribes to help them with their internal squabbles by acting as a mediator. With nothing to lose, he was glad to help, which gave him the opportunity to make his mark in the city. The result of Muhammad's involvement led to the creation of the Constitution of Medina, a contract between Muslims, Jews and non-Muslims concerning their relationship with one another. It was the first constitution of its kind in the region, promoting respect for the lives, the property and the places of worship for all involved. It regulated the rights and obligations between all the city's descendants of Abraham. With a new constitution, the city of Yathrib became a more peaceful place, attracting trade and improving the lives of its citizens. At this point, Muhammad received a new revelation, telling him to fight back against his enemies. In 624, a large Quraysh trading caravan was returning from Syria back to Mecca. Muhammad and the Muslims decided they would up their game by capturing the caravan in the desert. Anticipating this, the Quraysh diverted the caravan and sent a small army into Yathrib to attack the Muslims. Muhammad and his forces met the Meccan army at a watering hole on the outskirts of the city called Badr. A skirmish erupted which ended in the Meccan army retreating. Once the news of this victory spread, Muhammad and the Muslims' credibility and status grew in the minds of the common Arabs. Consequently, more recruits joined the Muslims, growing the religious order along with its army. Muhammad had another revelation, a message telling him from now on all Muslims must pray facing Mecca. Before this new revelation, it was considered normal practice to point towards the holy city of Jerusalem. When the Muslims began facing towards Mecca, it was seen by the Jews as an insult to their tradition, which antagonized and offended many traditional Jewish tribal leaders. It also symbolized the progressive deterioration of Jewish-Muslim relations. Furthermore, just as they had done with Jesus 600 years before, the Jews also rejected Muhammad's divine connection and would not accept him as an apostle of God. The more successful and powerful Muhammad and his followers became, the greater was the deterioration in relations with the Jews, leading to secret meetings and negotiations between the Jewish tribes in Yathrib and Muhammad's enemies in Mecca. This eventually erupted in a showdown where Muhammad felt compelled to act against the underhand actions of those Jewish tribes he felt had compromised the constitution of Yathrib and were planning to attack him. His army surrounded a Jewish village, and after a 2-week siege, he banished them from the city, sparing their lives. 1 year after the Battle of Badr, the Quraysh sent an army 3 times larger than Muhammad's in an attempt to crush him. Although the Muslim army was outnumbered, the battle resulted in a stalemate, giving Muhammad time to bolster his position. On his return to Yathrib, Muhammad discovered that some of the remaining Jewish tribes on the outskirts of the city were actively helping his enemies defeat him. In 627, the Quraysh of Mecca returned with help from the Jewish tribes with an army of 10,000 warriors. This was over 3 times the size of Muhammad's army of only 3,000 men. However, Muhammad gained the initiative by digging a massive trench to the north of the city, making it extremely difficult for the enemy's cavalry to cross. In an attempt to break the deadlock, the Quraysh secretly negotiated with the Banu Qurayza, a Jewish tribe in Yathrib, to attack Muhammad from the south. When this failed to gain any serious momentum, the Quraysh gave up and retreated back to Mecca, leaving the Banu Qurayza Jews to the mercy of the Muslims. Once again, Muhammad felt betrayed by the Jews, who had treacherously reneged on the constitution of Yathrib. He sent his army to their village, and after a 25-day siege, the Jews surrendered. This time, Muhammad had a problem. He knew if he banished them from the city, like he did with the other Jewish tribes, they might join with his enemy and come back later to attack him. He decided to hand over judgment to an independent mediator who found the tribe guilty of treason and sentenced all the men to death. The women and children were spared, only to become slaves to the Muslims. All 800 men were eventually put to the sword. Although the deaths of the Jews was not based on race or religious grounds, the knock-on effects created deep divisions within Muslim-Jewish relations, which it could be argued has never recovered. Following on from the Battle of the Trench, a truce was declared between the two opposing sides. However, in 629, the Quraysh broke this truce by attacking one of Muhammad's allies. This set in motion the beginning of the end for the Quraysh. A few months later, in 630, Muhammad gathered an army of 10,000 Muslims and headed south for Mecca. The Meccans put up a resistance, fighting for months, but eventually were overrun by the Muslims, who entered the city in triumph. Instead of putting his enemy to the sword, Muhammad declared an amnesty and forgave them all. When the city was safe, he made his way to the Kaaba, walked around it 7 times before removing all 360 idols which represented various pagan gods, leaving only the black stone, which is still there to this day. At this point, he declared that there is only one true God, Allah. In the ancient pagan world of star worship, many idols represented planets, stars, and constellations. It is an interesting coincidence that there were 360 idols in the Kaaba, the same number of degrees as the zodiac. And the act of circulating the Kaaba 7 times before removing the idols could have some metaphysical significance to the 7 planets of the ancient world, or the 7th Sephirot in the Kabbalah's Tree of Life, the Sephirot of Victory, ruled by Venus. By 631, the last pagan stronghold fell to the Muslims, giving them complete rule over all of Arabia. The only stone left in the Kaaba was the meteorite, which could have fallen to Earth as Venus moved into its new orbit around the time of Abraham. From the early days of Islam to now, the Kaaba is the focal point of the Muslim religion. Just as the glyph for Venus is the circle of focal consciousness over the cross of the physical material realm, the act of circling the black cube at Mecca reflects these metaphysical principles. Muhammad had now done all he had set out to achieve. In his final sermon to his followers the very next year, he commented on how he had abolished usury from the land that now belonged to the Muslims.